Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the recording for the course overview unit for week 1 in game design. So you can see that I'm right on course overview and it starts talking about game design. This is the introductory part. And for those of you who are new to my classes, remember that these recordings are used to complete the write-ups for the week. So the recordings, they're kind of my lecture for what you should know for the week. And this is also part of your grade. These count 20 points. So it's really important that you watch these recordings, then you do the write-ups. So if I look at this, the way to do these write-ups, as a reminder, you watch the recording, which is right here. You're watching this now, obviously. Then you copy and paste all of this. So you go down here and you copy all these 10 questions or whatever they are. Then Control C and then paste it into a word processor. Then as you watch this recording, when you come to an answer, pause the recording, then go to that word processor document and put the answers in. Check your spelling, your grammar, and all that. Then when you're finished with it, I suggest you save the file. So you could save this as week 1 Class Connect write-up, but save that file. But when you turn it in, you don't turn in the saved file, you just highlight all of it from the word processor program, and then paste it into the Dropbox. Do not attach a file. On these Class Connect write-ups, do not attach a file. Please, please, please. Follow the directions. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to walk you through all of the content for the course overview unit, and we're going to answer these questions as we walk through it. So the first couple of questions: what software will we use and why will you not download it till later? And what is the term used in gaming for different types of games? So we're going to keep that in our mind as we look at the introduction section. So here we are in the introduction session for game design. And you can see, imagine your life without fun and entertainment. It'd probably be pretty boring, right, if you didn't have the games. And if you're like my son, who's a senior in high school, he plays a lot of games and he probably spends more time doing gaming than he really should. But he's also a very active athlete. He does track and basketball, so I'm not too worried about that. But he still spends a considerable amount of time doing gaming, and he's played some games that I don't really agree with, but he's also played some games that are kind of educational. So there's good and bad with it. Now the thing about gaming is we're going to be using a program for this class called Multimedia Fusion. And we're not going to use it until we get into Unit 5 because it's only a 30-day download. So that is why we're not downloading it till later. So it's called Multimedia Fusion, and we don't download it until later because it only has a 30-day trial. And I'll tell you when you need to download it. Now the course description. This is all in the syllabus, so I'm not going to go over again, but you've read all this. If you looked at the recording from the beginning of the week, the Getting Started recording, it talked about all of that. It also talked about when you finish this course, all the things you'll be able to do. So we've covered those things. The objective for this unit, look at the history behind gaming and the different types of games in terms of the genre. And genre, G-N-R-E, genre means the types of games. So those of you that like to read, of course there are different types of book genre, right? There are sci-fi books, biography books, things like that. Same with movies. There are different genre in movies. So genre just means the types of something. So games are considered, there are different genres in games. Now this has a graded assignment, and we're not doing the player elements discussion, but there is the unit quiz you'll do over here, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's the introduction part. So if we go back to the Class Connect write-up, did we answer these 2 questions? Yes, we did answer those 2 questions. So now we're going on to Section A. And in Section A, was the name of the first video game? When was it developed? List the many ways games are played these days. And the next generation of virtual reality is virtual reality. Explain what that is. So now we're into Section A. And now we're going to think about the history of games. And the reason you need to think about the history of games is just to see how much they have changed over the years. And in your lifetimes, they've changed tremendously. In my lifetime, video gaming, my first video game I played was Pong on an old Atari setup that my friend had. And now you're getting into more real life, and certainly getting into virtual reality is the next big step. So the birth of games, here's a tutorial that will give you the history of video games. You can also look at a copy of the script or the wording for this. So if you look at the script, I'd like you to go through that video just to learn a little bit more than what I'm asking you on this write-up, so you'll learn a little bit more about gaming. But you see that video games started with a game called Space War in the early 1960s. And the problem with it was that the hardware was too expensive. And then Pong came out in 1971, and I played my first Pong game in probably 1977 or something. As I said, my friend had an Atari game, and that was right in here as a cartridge-based console. So you can put cartridges in. And you can look through the history of here. 1983, the industry crashed because there were too many clone games and poor games. What happened was people were getting really into gaming, so a bunch of these lousy companies came in and started to create games. And Atari, some of your parents may have had Atari 2600. There were games they had based on movies and things like that, but they just didn't sell very well, and a lot of the companies went bankrupt. A lot of the console companies went bankrupt. So Atari was making the games and the consoles, but then other companies tried to make the consoles, and a lot of them went bankrupt. So you can see then in the 80s came home computer video games. So that was a whole new market. You did not have to have a standalone piece of equipment that plugged into your TV. You played on computers. And now we come back to TV games, haven't we? Or playing games on your television sets. So this talks about all of that, and now Nintendo NES came in 1986. Nintendo was the big player then. Sony came in, and other ones came in. But you can go through the whole history here and learn a lot about the early days of gaming. So make sure you go through that video just to hear what it's all about. So popular games, that brings us into the 90s. And then the 90s, of course, gone into different games like this. So you can see like Wolfenstein 3D, that was a popular one. That was almost one of the first first-person shooter type games. Doom, Grand Theft Auto in the early days, Final Fantasy, etc. So you can see lots of different games that came in to being. But there are also adventure games like Prince of Persia was a puzzle type game. So there were a variety of different genre that came out. And of course, the next generation is virtual reality. And the definition of this means that the players interact with the computer simulated environment. So you'd have this whole virtual reality set up on you. And we're getting close to that with the motion games. The ones where you, like the Wii and others, and Microsoft and others have come out with that, where you stand in front of it and the camera can see your actions. So that's the middle step before you get into true virtual reality, but we're getting really close on that. So let's go back to the write-up. And it says, what was the name of the first video game? When was it developed? Talked about that. List the many ways games are played these days. We'll have to go back and see that. And next generation virtual reality, explain what that is. So many ways games are played these days. We skip that one. Let's see where if that answer was on here clearly. Not there. I know it was in here, I wouldn't have it in the write-up. Let's see. Maybe it's in the next section. Of course, Well, this talks about a lot of it, like local area networks. So, via the internet, games can be played. They can be played on standalone systems. Games can be played on the handhelds, like the Nintendo DS. So think of a few, even though this might not mention everything, think of the different ways that games can be played these days. And we might find some of that in Section B also. Okay, in Section B, what is the impact of gameplay as you move up a level in a game? What are the main player elements? And think of your favorite game in terms of player elements. What about that game makes it interesting and fun? So the impact as you move up levels and main player elements in games. So now we're into Section B. Section B, so now we're talking about player elements. And player elements are things that connect the player to the game. So we're going to define what makes a game good in terms of player elements and define each type of player element. So the first player element that's really important is challenges and goals. Because if a game does not have challenges and goals, then it's going to be boring. So it has to have something that the player is going to overcome or beat in order for it to keep people's interest. And that includes, we get up into difficulty level. So, game designer, you introduce difficulty level to make the task more difficult for the players. Sometimes the levels are introduced before the game, and the players can choose whatever level they want to go to. Sometimes the levels come in as you're playing in the game, right? So there's difficulty levels, and there are challenges. So this talks all about how as you move up in a game, how the levels change, and it increases the player's interest. So it increases the player's interest. That's what the challenges and the levels do. And then there are also, puzzle type games. So this one is where you're, solving a problem, and it can be kind of a learning exercise for game players. Another player element is directions. So the directions tells a player how to play the game, how the controls work, what you need to do in the game, the main aim of the game. So we talked before about challenges, right? So challenges and goals, that's one player element. Another player element are the directions in the game. So again, things that affect how the player plays the game is what we're talking about. So they have directions on how to move up from one area to the next in lots of games. Then there are the controls, meaning how do you move about in the game, and then what are some strategies that you could use. So, without controls, we can't make the players do anything in a game. So the controls have to be easily understandable, and the complexity depends on the genre of the game. So creating controls with less complexity is best, because if they're simple controls, then more players can use them. Most common controls are joystick, keyboards. Of course, now you have control with your hands, like with the Wii, right? Where you can just move your hands, you can control things. Drama and interactivity, another player element. Drama are the twists and the turns in the game's story, the things that happen in a game or happen to you as a player. And as you go through the drama, it shows it's important to particular characters, but also talks about the protagonist, the key person in the game. Generally, the user takes on the role of the protagonist, or the key person in the game. And user interface is a big part of that. So the greater the interactivity, the more interesting the game is, right? So we've looked at lots of different game elements. And here's a discussion on player elements. Skip that discussion. We're not doing any of the discussions in the class. I integrate some of those discussions into the Class Connect write-ups at times. So let's go back to the write-up and let's see. What is the name of the first? Well, we did that. So we're going to go down to Section B. What is the impact of gameplay as you move up levels? We talked about that. What is the main player element? What are the main player elements in gaming? Well, we looked at 5 or 6 player elements, didn't we? Finally, think about your favorite game and the player elements that it has. What about the game makes it interesting and fun to keep your attention? And when you answer question number 8, make sure you mention some of those player elements that we just went over in section 2. Now finally in section 3, list 5 game genre and which is your favorite. Then also in section C, you're going to go back to question 8 with the game you listed here and figure out what genre it belongs to. Okay, section C. So section C is a little bit longer, but there are fewer questions. So again, genre is the style or variety. So games are categorized by the way they are played. And video games are classified according to the similarities, the amount of interaction, different things like that. But over the years, if you think about the genre, these are really the main genre for today's games. So sports games. So sports games, the main thing about them is they replicate a real-life game. So it could be a soccer game, football game, like Madden 2013 or Major League Baseball games that come out. And those are really nice because nowadays with the internet, they give you real-time statistics on players. So if you're really into baseball or football or basketball, you can play these sports games online and have real player data and create your own players. Action games, so the story would be driving a car or driving a motorcycle, or some of the ideas of action games. And there are other varieties, but action games, they're compelling in real time, means that when you play, you're playing within the game in real time. So if you're doing a lap on a course like the cars are in this picture, then you're going around that track in 1 minute and 30 seconds. That's in real life and in the game. Fighting games. So you've seen lots of those, and some of you might really like those. So you face off against an opponent with fists or gloves or weapons, whatever it might be. You can get different weapons if you reach different levels. First person games. So this is where first person is where you're looking from the character's point of view. So like this first person game, I have a pistol in my hand and I'm walking through this looking from first person point of view. So that's what this is called, FPS, first person shooter game is what this one might be, but it doesn't have to be a shooter game to be first person. You could be like in medieval times where you're first person and you're going throughout a medieval environment and it's not a shooting game. You might be searching for somebody. Third person games, this is where you watch somebody doing something. So third person games is you look at another person's point of view. So it's like you're in a helicopter maybe, or you're on the person's shoulder or something like that, and you're just overlooking the scene and seeing what happens. Puzzle games. A lot of you probably play like Candy Crush and some of those games on your phones and other devices. So that would be those types of games. Role-playing, where you put yourself, a lot of the medieval games have really neat role-playing games, and they're very educational too. So you can see the different types of titles that role-playing games. And this is reality-based because a lot of the role-playing games are either true history or they're futuristic role-playing games. Those are kind of interesting too. Real-time strategy games. So you can see down here, Age of Empire, Warcraft, Age of Mythology. So there are different types of games with the real-time or strategy. And it could be real life or human type games. There's some army games that you play and things like that. So there are a variety of games out there that are considered strategy games. Simulation games. So this would simulate either a real world or it could be futuristic city. Sim City is a good one of there. There's also some online or even game apps for your phone that are simulation, like Lemonade Stand or Stock Market Game and things like that. So these simulate or try to relate to real life or a futuristic life. Here's a genre activity. Go through this to see if you can identify different genres. And then finally, the unit quiz, and we'll talk about the unit quiz in a minute over here. So we've gone through this whole unit. So if I go back to the write-up, you'll see in section C down here, list 5 game genres, select which is your favorite, explain why, and then refer back to question 8, because in question 8 you mentioned your favorite game, and what genre is your favorite game categorized. So we answered all these answers. So again, you're doing this in a word processor, you're including the questions and the answers, and then you're copying and pasting all that into the Dropbox. Do not attach a file. Now the quiz for this week. Here's the quiz preview. There's the quiz preview right there. So you go find the answers to these. Then you go down here to click on the quiz and do the quiz. So that's all I have for you. And we've gone through everything for this week. The getting started recording, the getting started write-up. And if I go right here to week 1, this is covered in previous recording. And then this recording covers this information. So I don't see why this would take you more than a couple of hours to get everything done for this week. So I look forward to your work coming in. Thanks everyone. Bye.